The champagne flute trembled in Susanna's manicured fingers as she watched her husband Wenger coo over the ultrasound photo, his face glowing with a tenderness she hadn't seen in months. The baby shower buzzed around them, pastel balloons, laughter, the sweet scent of vanilla cake, but all she could hear was the thundering of her own heartbeat. "Look at those little fingers," Wenger whispered to the blonde woman beside him, his voice thick with wonder. Chelsea's hand rested protectively over her swollen belly, her engagement ring, a ring larger than the one Susanna wore, catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the living room windows. Susanna's sister Zara squeezed her arm, whispering urgently, "Girl, we can leave. Right now." But Susanna couldn't move. She watched as Wenger's family, their family, gathered around Chelsea like she was precious china. His mother, who had barely acknowledged Susanna's presence in 8 years of marriage, was already planning nursery colors. His father clapped Wenger on the back, beaming with pride for his first grandchild. The same family who had questioned whether Susanna was the right fit when she and Wenger first got serious. The same people who had made subtle comments about her natural hair, her career ambitions, her strong personality. Now they celebrated another woman carrying their bloodline while Susanna stood invisible in the corner, clutching the manila envelope that would change everything. Wenger caught her eye across the room and smiled, that practiced smile he'd perfected over the last 6 months. The one that said everything is normal while his entire life had shifted around another woman's pregnancy. "Isn't this wonderful, baby?" he called out, his voice carrying that false brightness that made Susanna's stomach turn. "Everyone's so excited." Susanna's grip tightened on the envelope. Inside were papers that would strip away 8 years of marriage, financial settlements, and a future she'd never asked for. Her divorce attorney had been thorough. Wenger would lose more than he'd ever imagined possible. But as she watched him kiss Chelsea's forehead, surrounded by their approving family, one question burned in her chest. Would destroying him feel as satisfying as she'd hoped, or would it just prove she'd never really known the man she married at all? 8 years earlier, Susanna had fallen for Wenger's laugh first, deep and genuine, the kind that made her believe in happy endings. She was a rising marketing executive with dreams bigger than her small apartment, while he was the charming finance director who brought her coffee every morning and listened to her pitch ideas over lunch. Back then, Wenger had been her champion. When his family made their pointed comments about her urban background, he'd defended her fiercely. When colleagues questioned her rapid promotions, he'd reminded them of her MBA from Northwestern and her impressive campaign results. He'd proposed on the beach in Santorini, promising they'd build an empire together, two ambitious people madly in love. But success had changed him. Or maybe it had just revealed who he'd always been. Zara had warned her from the beginning. "He's got that golden boy syndrome," she'd said during their engagement party. "Men like that think the world owes them everything, including the perfect wife who'll never challenge them." Susanna had dismissed it as sisterly overprotectiveness. Zara, a divorce attorney herself, saw the worst in marriages daily. But now, watching Wenger's hand rest possessively on Chelsea's lower back, Susanna wondered if her sister had seen something she'd been too in love to notice. Chelsea was everything Susanna wasn't: soft-spoken, agreeable, content to play supporting roles. She'd been Wenger's assistant for 2 years, the kind of woman who laughed at all his jokes and never questioned his decisions. When the affair began 6 months ago, it hadn't been about passion. It had been about ego. Wenger needed someone who made him feel powerful, important, unquestioned. The irony wasn't lost on Susanna. She'd built her career on reading people, understanding what motivated them, predicting their next moves. Yet she'd been blindsided by her own husband's betrayal, discovering the pregnancy the same day she'd planned to surprise him with news of her own promotion to VP. Instead of celebrating her success, she'd spent the last month meticulously planning his downfall. The moment that changed everything had been deceptively small. 3 weeks ago, Susanna had walked into their home office to find Wenger hastily closing his laptop, his face flushed with guilt. "Just work stuff," he'd muttered, but she'd glimpsed enough of the screen to see ultrasound images and text messages filled with heart emojis. That night, while Wenger slept beside her, the same bed they'd shared for 8 years, Susanna had stared at the ceiling and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Not just heartbreak, though that came in waves so intense she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. It was something colder, more calculated. Rage with purpose. She'd spent the next morning calling Zara, then the most ruthless divorce attorney in Chicago, a woman who specialized in high-net-worth cases and had never lost to a cheating husband. "I want him to feel what I felt," Susanna had told her attorney, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. That moment when your entire world disappears and you realize the person you trusted most has been living a lie. The attorney had smiled, a sharp expression that promised justice. Public humiliation, asset protection, and emotional devastation? We can absolutely arrange that. The baby shower invitation had arrived a week later, hand-delivered by Chelsea herself with an awkward smile and nervous apology. Wenger thought, he hoped you might want to come. For family. Susanna had accepted with gracious enthusiasm, already envisioning the perfect stage for her finale. The weeks leading up to the shower had been a masterclass in deception. Susanna played the role of the understanding wife, even helping to plan the menu and decorations. She watched Wenger struggle with guilt and anticipation, seeing him torn between the life he'd built and the future he'd created in secret. "Are you okay with all this?" he'd asked one evening, his hand hovering uncertainly over her shoulder as she arranged baby-themed centerpieces at their dining room table. "I want you to be happy," she'd replied, and it wasn't entirely a lie. She did want him to experience happiness, right before she destroyed it completely. Their conversations had become careful dances around the truth. Wenger, desperate to ease his conscience, had grown more attentive, bringing her flowers and suggesting romantic dinners. Susanna accepted each gesture while building her case, documenting his assets, gathering evidence, preparing for war. The hardest part had been the nights. Lying beside him, feeling his familiar warmth, remembering the man she'd fallen in love with. Sometimes she'd catch glimpses of the old Wenger, when he laughed at something on TV, or absently reached for her hand during movies. Those moments made her question everything, wondering if there was a path back to who they'd been. But then she'd remember Chelsea's engagement ring, bigger than her own. She'd remember the way his family had looked at the ultrasound with joy they'd never shown for Susanna's achievements. She'd remember that Wenger had chosen this path, made these decisions, created this betrayal. Her resolve would harden again. Zara had been her anchor during these weeks, reminding her of her worth when doubt crept in. "He made his choice when he decided you weren't enough," Zara had said during one of their late-night strategy sessions. "Now he gets to live with the consequences." The anticipation had become intoxicating. Every fake smile, every pretended moment of marital bliss, was building toward this crescendo. Susanna found herself sleeping better than she had in months, energized by the promise of justice. The revelation came not from Wenger, but from his mother during the baby shower's gift-opening ceremony. Mrs. Henderson, typically reserved, had been loosened by champagne and joy. "You know," she announced to the gathered crowd, her voice carrying across the living room. "When Wenger first brought Susanna home, I wondered if he was just going through a phase. Successful women can be so demanding." The room fell silent. Susanna felt every eye turned toward her, but Mrs. Henderson continued, oblivious to the tension. "But Chelsea is different. She understands that a man needs to feel like a man. Look how happy Wenger is now. This is the family he was meant to have." Susanna's champagne flute finally slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. The sound cut through the awkward silence like a gunshot. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." Chelsea jumped up, her maternal instincts kicking in as she moved to clean the mess. "No," Susanna said quietly, her voice carrying a steel edge that made everyone freeze. "Don't." She looked around the room, at Wenger's guilty face, his family's uncomfortable expressions, at Chelsea's confused concern. This moment crystallized everything. She had never been family to these people. She had been a mistake they'd tolerated, waiting for Wenger to come to his senses and choose someone more suitable. "I have something for you," Susanna said, reaching for the manila envelope that had sat beside her purse all afternoon. Her voice was calm, almost serene. "A gift for the happy couple." Wenger's face went pale. "Susanna, maybe we should." "Open it," she said, holding his gaze. "In front of everyone. After all, this is a celebration of family, isn't it?" Wenger's hands shook as he opened the envelope, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, devastating comprehension. The divorce papers were thorough, but it was the attached financial documentation that made him sink into the nearest chair. "What is this?" Chelsea asked, her voice small and frightened. Susanna's attorney had been brilliant. Not only had she documented Wenger's affair with company communications, but she'd discovered his embezzlement, small amounts over 2 years, hidden in fake consulting fees that had funded his relationship with Chelsea. The engagement ring, the luxury apartment where he'd been keeping her, the expensive prenatal care, all paid for with money that belonged to their shared business investments. "It's our divorce," Susanna announced to the silent room. along with evidence that my soon-to-be ex-husband has been stealing from our joint accounts to fund his affair." Mrs. Henderson gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "That's impossible. Wenger would never." "The bank records are all there," Susanna continued, her voice steady as a surgeon's. "As is the forensic accounting report. Wenger has stolen approximately $200,000 over the past 2 years. Money that I earned, money that I trusted him to manage." Chelsea looked at Wenger desperately. "Tell them it's not true. Tell them she's lying." But Wenger couldn't speak. The evidence was irrefutable, and they all knew it. "The baby," Chelsea whispered, her hand protectively covering her belly. "What about the baby?" "That's between you and him," Susanna replied, though not without gentleness. "But I'd suggest getting your own attorney. Quickly." The room erupted in chaos. Wenger's father began shouting about family loyalty while his mother wept into her napkin. Guests whispered furiously among themselves, some slipping out the back door to avoid the drama. Chelsea sank onto the couch, overwhelmed and abandoned as the reality of her situation hit her. And in the center of it all sat Wenger, destroyed and speechless, watching 8 years of marriage and a carefully constructed life crumble in the space of 5 minutes. Susanna felt empty. She'd expected triumph, satisfaction, the sweet taste of revenge served cold. Instead, she felt hollow, watching the wreckage of what had once been love. It was Zara who broke the spell, appearing at Susanna's side like a guardian angel in a designer dress. "We should go," she said quietly, taking her sister's arm. But as they headed toward the door, Chelsea's voice stopped them. "Wait." The pregnant woman struggled to her feet, her face streaked with tears but her voice surprisingly steady. "I need to say something." The room fell silent again, everyone turning to watch the young woman who'd been at the center of this destruction. "I didn't know," Chelsea said, looking directly at Susanna. "About the money, I mean. I knew about you. I knew he was married. And I'm not proud of that. But I didn't know he was stealing to pay for us." Susanna studied the younger woman's face, searching for deception and finding only raw honesty. "He told me you two were separated," Chelsea continued, her voice breaking. "That you were just waiting for the right time to make it official. He said you'd grown apart, that you didn't want the same things anymore. And you believed him?" Susanna asked, not unkindly. Chelsea's laugh was bitter. "I wanted to believe him. I was 25 and stupid and thought I was in love with a man who made me feel special. I thought I was saving him from an unhappy marriage." She turned to look at Wenger, who still sat frozen in his chair. "But I was just another lie, wasn't I? Another story you told yourself to justify what you wanted." The question hung in the air, but Wenger had no answer. Perhaps there wasn't one. "I'm sorry," Chelsea said, turning back to Susanna. "For all of it. For believing him, for not asking harder questions, for celebrating a baby shower while you were planning a divorce. You deserved better than this." In that moment, Susanna saw something she hadn't expected. Chelsea wasn't her enemy. They were both victims of the same man's selfishness, both women who'd loved someone who couldn't love them back honestly. "So did you," Susanna replied softly. 3 months later, Susanna stood in her new apartment, a sleek downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Lake Michigan. The divorce had been finalized with surprising speed once Wenger's embezzlement came to light. Rather than face criminal charges, he'd agreed to every demand, including full restitution and a settlement that left him financially devastated. The apartment was everything she'd dreamed of but never dared to want while married, modern, sophisticated, unapologetically hers. She'd celebrated her VP promotion with a small gathering of friends who'd supported her through the divorce, women who'd reminded her of her strength when she'd forgotten it herself. But tonight, she was alone with a bottle of wine and a letter that had arrived that morning. Chelsea's handwriting was careful, precise. "Dear Susanna, I wanted you to know that I had the baby, a girl. She's healthy and beautiful, and she has her father's eyes, though I hope she inherits better judgment. Wenger hasn't been around much since the divorce was finalized. I think the reality of supporting a child on his teacher's salary, yes, his teaching high school math now, has made him reconsider his priorities. Or maybe he just realized that running away doesn't solve anything. I wanted to hate you for destroying the fantasy I was living in. But the truth is, you saved me from building my life around another lie. I've gone back to school, nursing, this time. My daughter will grow up watching her mother build something real, something honest. I know we'll never be friends, and I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that what you did that day, as painful as it was necessary. For all of us. Thank you for refusing to let us all keep living the lie. Chelsea. P.S. I named her Grace. It seemed appropriate. Susanna set the letter down and walked to her windows, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the dark water. She thought about Grace, unowned, undeserved, freely given. She thought about the woman she'd been 8 years ago, full of love and trust and dreams. She thought about the woman she'd become, stronger, wiser, more careful with her heart. She thought about Wenger, probably grading papers in some small apartment, finally facing the consequences of his choices. She felt nothing. No satisfaction in his downfall, no lingering anger, no residual love. Just the peaceful emptiness of a chapter completely closed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Zara. Dinner tomorrow? I have news about the promotion. Susanna smiled, typing back, yes. And I have news about the future. Because for the first time in years, she was excited about what came next. 1 year later, Susanna received an unexpected call. Mom wants to apologize, came Wenger's voice through the phone, hesitant and aged beyond his years. She's been going to therapy, working through some things. She realizes how she treated you was wrong. Susanna was in her office, reviewing campaigns for her latest client, a non-profit that helped women rebuild their lives after divorce. Through her window, she could see Lake Michigan sparkling in the autumn sunlight. That's good for her, Susanna replied neutrally. Therapy is helpful. She'd like to see you, if you're willing, to make amends properly. I don't think that would serve either of us, Wenger. A long pause. Then, how are you? Really? It was the first time he'd asked that question in years, maybe ever. The first time he'd sounded genuinely curious about her answer rather than just expecting reassurance that everything was fine. I'm happy, she said, and realized it was completely true. I'm building something real. Something mine. I'm glad, he said, and she could hear that he meant it. I know I never said this properly before, but you deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved honesty. Yes, she agreed simply. I did. Chelsea sends her regards, by the way. She's graduating nursing school next month. Grace is walking now, getting into everything. Susanna smiled despite herself. Tell her congratulations. Both of them. After they hung up, Susanna sat quietly for a moment, processing the strange feeling of closure. Not forgiveness, that was still a bridge too far, but acknowledgement. Recognition. The understanding that they had all been different people then, acting from wounds and wants they hadn't yet learned to name. Her assistant knocked, interrupting her thoughts. Your 3 o'clock is here, the documentary interview. Send them in, Susanna said, straightening her shoulders. The interviewer was young, eager, working on a piece about women who'd rebuilt their careers after major life changes. As she set up her camera, she chatted about inspiration and resilience, about women who'd turned betrayal into triumph. What would you say to other women going through something similar? Was her final question. Susanna considered carefully. I'd say that the goal isn't revenge, even when it feels satisfying in the moment. The goal is truth. And sometimes the truth burns everything down before it sets you free. But freedom, real freedom, is worth the fire. She paused, looking out at the lake again, thinking of all the storms it had weathered while remaining essentially itself. I'd tell them that the person who betrayed them gave them a gift, though it doesn't feel like it at the time. They gave them the truth about who they really are. And once you know that, once you stop trying to be who someone else needs you to be, you can become who you were always meant to be. The interviewer smiled, clearly moved. And who were you meant to be? Susanna's answer came without hesitation. Myself. Completely, unapologetically myself. As the camera stopped rolling and the crew packed up their equipment, Susanna returned to her work. Outside, the lake stretched endlessly toward the horizon, beautiful and untamable and free. What would you have done in Susanna's place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the greatest love story is the one you write with yourself. Hit like if you believe in second chances and the courage to start over.